The Day Billy Fell Off the Cliff by Byron Broussard. The Day Billy Fell Off the Cliff, Part 15. It was the flaming beast's soul, Jessica said in amazement. It came from the star and hit you as soon as you consumed her. Jessica paused. She isn't inside of you, is she? Not in me nor you, Billy. Billy felt around inside his head, and me looked at herself. She's not in me, Billy answered Jessica. No flaming beasts in here, me said. We should go look for her, Jessica proclaimed inside of Billy's head. See if she made it back and in what condition. Flashes of red lightning shot towards the star, one after the other. Do we gotta look for that one? Can't me consume somebody else? Can't me consume someone else? Billy asked, sounding exhausted. Oh, come on. She was not a better fighter than me, Jessica said. And you have me, who's kick-ass. You have nothing to be afraid of. Me smiled and nodded. Me, can you fight? Billy asked, looking out into the sky. There were flaming beasts flying towards them from multiple directions. Can you incapacitate these flaming people like I have without consuming them? He asked while he pushed her into the nearest cottage. I can't get harmed here except through you, Billy. That battle was painful for both of us. Yes, I can fight if you ask me to. Billy looked at me questioningly. Well then, how about you protect me from the flaming people who try to hurt me for stopping them from attacking you? Billy looked out the door of the cottage and saw a number of flaming beasts flying through the air and many flaming people walking around. Some of them were fighting off in the distance. Okay, I'll protect you, Billy, me said in her toneless voice. Billy hid her out of view of the flaming people outside. It looks like they are looking for something. I bet they came because of the blue lightning, Jessica said. We need to come up with a plan and act on it before we get sidetracked with fighting. Jessica paused for a second. Me? Can you take us to the flaming woman? Flaming people were outside of the cottage next to the decapitated bodies. Flaming humans began to consume the flaming beasts that were lying on the coal-like ground. The flaming beasts that were flying overhead descended and began to fight with the flaming humans. Billy watched as flaming beasts swooped in and picked up flaming humans with their claws. The beasts ripped the humans apart before consuming them. He watched the flaming humans swing their swords, chopping off claws and wings before consuming flaming beasts. The noise of the scene was hellish. Yes, I can find her, me answered Jessica. I think you need to do this one alone, me. You are much faster than I am, and there are way too many flaming people around, Billy said, looking out the cottage door. Find her, grab her, and bring her to where I am. He turned and looked at me, who was looking back at him. I'm going to switch cottages while you're gone. You won't have trouble finding me after, will you? You won't have trouble finding me after you find her, will you? I got this, me said in her toneless voice. She smiled at Billy and tightened the golden rope around her waist. Are you sure about this, Billy? Jessica asked, sounding unsure. Yes. Fly her to us fast and fly low, me. Billy turned away from me and towards the door. He took out his sword and ran into the fight. The middle of the fight was very loud. Everywhere Billy turned, he could hear swords clanging and wings flapping and flaming people yelling. The sounds of the war drowned out all the familiar sounds. The sound of the war drowned out the familiar sound of campfire. Billy stopped to look around and flipped his sword into his left hand. The blade went into the air and stabbed the flaming beast that was coming from above. Billy caught the sword and looked around more cautiously. He looked to the sky and heard the wind of the lone star almost drowned out with flaming beast's wings flaps. What are you doing? Jessica asked, sounding patient. Billy remembered his objective and began walking. He spun his sword like a baton in his flaming hands Every time the sword would spin, it would block an attack from a flaming beast, making an effective shield. He walked slowly at first, then Billy began to notice flaming people looking at him. He picked up speed and stabbed at a flaming beast from time to time. "Got her," he said inside of Billy's head. "Let's find a cottage to hide in for a while," Jessica suggested. "Yeah," Billy said while spinning his sword in the air. The sword cut a flaming beast in half. The body crumpled onto the ground in front of Billy. He looked around while keeping his walking pace, spinning his sword like a baton. Flaming people were looking at the body and Billy walking away from it. Billy stopped and stabbed at a flaming beast for a while before changing direction and beginning to walk again. Billy spotted a cottage that flaming people weren't standing close to the entrance of. His spinning sword blocked the hand of a flaming person. Billy turned around to see a confused flaming lady. He stopped spinning his sword and stabbing at flaming beasts before giving the flaming woman a short wave of the hand and turning around. Billy stopped spinning his sword. "I don't want to draw attention to myself any more than I have to, since we are in eyesight of the chosen cottage." Billy felt the sword go through his back. He fell to his knees in pain, and the sword was ripped out. He hardened his mind and stood up and faced his attacker. It was the flaming woman who had tried to touch him. The flaming woman was struggling with a flaming beast who was focused on attacking her. Billy took the opportunity to heal himself and run into the cottage. There was a flaming skeleton holding its knees in the back on the ground. Billy went next to it and dug a hole in the coal-like ground. He made the interior bigger than the entrance so it would look normal from above and have a space below. "Watch out for the flaming woman that stabbed me. She's close and looking for anything out of the ordinary." "I'll fly some false roots around the cottage before coming in," he said in a toneless voice. "Be right there," he said, then appeared inside the hole with the flaming lady. The flaming woman was tied with her arms to her waist by the golden rope. Bee was holding the other end of the rope. She brushed the flames from her Vanta black hands and arms. "Did you touch her?" Jessica asked me. Me shook her head and held up the rope. "Touch her, me. Tell us what happens when you do," Jessica encouraged me. The flaming woman began to struggle as she watched me get closer to her. Me reached out a Vanta black hand and put it on the shoulder of the flaming woman. Mr. Intuition asked what's going on. "Her me wants to grow," me reported. "Did you tell him anything in return?" Billy asked. "I was giving off the feeling of growing and answering questions for myself," me said in her toneless voice. She shrugged and backed away from the flaming woman. "She's in the body of a flaming woman now. Was she that way when you found her?" "Was she this way when you found her, me?" Jessica asked. "Yes," me answered. "So, do we do this the easy way or the hard way?" Billy asked. Billy, Jessica asked. "You either consume her or try to talk through touch." Billy straightened up and faced the flaming lady. They looked at each other and Billy made gestures towards his hands and her shoulder. Then he made gestures towards his eyes. "Jessica, you gave me a great idea to talk through touching." The flaming woman looked at Billy sideways. Billy repeated the gesture to his hand, then her shoulder, then to his eyes. I'm going to enter the blackness of self-reflection while we have a physical link. We'll talk through touching." "Wow, okay. Yeah, that sounds like it should work, actually," Jessica said, amazed. The flaming woman still looked confused, but she nodded and Billy put his hand on her shoulder. He paused for a second, seeing if she would close her eyes. Then he closed his eyes. "Here goes nothing," Jessica said. Billy entered the darkness of self-reflection. The image of the flaming coffee shop appeared. Jessica and me sat at the table with coffee in front of them. Billy's image walked towards the door of the flaming coffee shop and opened it. There was a light in the darkness that began to grow. Billy reached out for the light with his mind, and the light got closer and bigger. When the light arrived, it looked like a door that fits perfectly over the door to the flaming coffee shop, like a screen door on a house. The door was closed. "All right, you guys, ready for this?" "All right, you guys ready for this?" Billy asked. "This is fun," Mee said in a toneless voice, while clapping her hands together. "Yeah," Jessica said, sounding unsure. Mee looked towards Jessica and held her hand. They stood up and joined Billy at the door. "Should we knock?" Jessica asked. Billy turned to look at her and me. "I mean, the door is here, but it is also closed," she said. "Yes, let's knock, Billy. I want to do it," Mee said, running up to the door. "Yeah, go ahead, whatever," Billy said, stepping out of Mee's way. "Yeah, go ahead, whatever," Billy said, stepping out of Mee's way. Mee stopped at the door and felt it with both Fanta Black hands. It looked to Billy like she was reading its energy. Mee knocked 6 solid times. She stepped back next to Jessica, and they all waited for the answer. The handle moved. The door opened. "No fucking way!" A voice came from behind the door. "Look at this shit! They have it on fire in there! It's so small! Who the fuck is that?" The flaming woman said, pointing at me. "Yo, this is me, also known as Miss Intuition. This is my landscape, but his head, and we need to talk," Jessica said quickly and decisively. The flaming woman tilted her head with a smirk, but was silent and still waiting for Jessica to continue. "Something happened for the first time that was bigger than this happening for the first time," Jessica said, sounding a bit confused towards the end of the sentence. "Stick to the facts at hand," Billy said, taking his eyes off the flaming woman to glance at the image of Jessica for a second. The flaming woman was visibly disturbed by Billy's interruption, but she listened on. "You were involved in something that we've never seen happen in this place, and we'd like to ask for your help. We'd like to ask for you help recounting the event," Jessica said to the flaming woman. The flaming woman began to look around the room. Her vision stopped at me. "What's in it for me? What do I get?" the flaming woman said, looking at Billy. "Well, we can actually introduce you to your intuition, and then you can keep your memories through the bag and everything. Your journey becomes eternal," Jessica said with a hand held out like she was weighing the option. Mee smiled up at Jessica and took her hand. "That shit sounds like a curse. No death in this hell of a place?" the flaming woman said, stepping back and looking at the interior of her place. There was no fire. It looked like the inside of an office building. It was deep blue color, 2 open floors, and filled with doors that led to office rooms or conference rooms. Some of the rooms were see-through, while others were behind a deep blue wall. Billy was reminded of a fish tank. "You said something actually new happened, which means maybe we just didn't find the way out yet. Which means being immortal here is most likely a step in that direction." The flaming woman had her hand on her chin. She was looking at the floor of the flaming coffee shop. "And this is new too, isn't it? He didn't consume me, but we are in each other's mind space visibly." She looked at Billy. "That's a new occurrence that happened in front of you again. I can explain this one, though," Billy said, taking a pause. The flaming woman glanced at Jessica, who was standing silent, holding Mee's hand. The flaming woman looked back at Billy. "I needed to talk to you about when you hurt me on the battlefield and me consumed you, but talking through touching is not my specialty, and it's often not inclusive to my party." Billy made a motion towards Jessica with his hand. "I thought if touching in this place creates a mind link, then touching and entering the black of self-reflection would have to connect both mind and vision. It worked, and I'm sure it would have always worked, but I doubt anyone here was in quite the position to be delicate enough to accomplish this, Billy said, shrugging. I doubt anyone here was in quite the position to be delicate enough to accomplish this, Billy said, shrugging. Because the simple way is to consume and force, will against will. But how would you know what did and didn't happen? The flaming woman asked Billy. She's a monster too, Jessica said to me in a whisper. I like her, me said in her toneless voice. She took Jessica's hand in her hands and smiled. Jessica laughed and loosened up a bit. Billy cleared his throat. Well, since I arrived, I've been on a path of information and exploration. I've once consumed a self-proclaimed pathfinder who surveyed his fair share of flaming people and flaming beasts. And they've given me a general idea of what's happened and what hasn't ever happened here. Billy paused, seeming to expect an interruption that never came. No one has ever found a way out. No one has ever connected two self-reflections, and no one had ever manifested their intuition, and no one had ever seen blue lightning before. I connected two self-reflections. I manifested me. I am finding a way out, and you were the blue lightning. Billy stopped speaking and looked down. He looked at Jessica and me, who were holding hands and smiling at him. He looked at the flaming woman who had her hand on her chin. I'll take that immortality and your name, the flaming woman said, then paused. And I want to see your book for a few seconds. Then I'll tell you everything. The flaming woman looked up and smiled. Billy manifested his book and handed it to the flaming woman. I am Billy, and only I can judge me. He pointed at me. Only I can judge my intuition. Only I can judge misintuition. Only I can judge me. He looked at the flaming woman hopefully as she held his book in her hands. The flaming woman shook her head and took a step back. As her head finished shaking, with a quick snap, the office space behind her changed. It looked more lived in and less blue. The book she was holding was now her own. It was upside down and open backwards. All this time, the little whiteboard in the conference room was my own little intuition. The flaming woman said, "Excuse me." She walked away from the door and towards another door, then turned around to face Billy. Your book, please? Billy glanced over to Jessica and me, who were still holding hands and smiling. He manifested his book again and tossed it into the flaming woman's door. She caught the book with one hand. Thanks. You're welcome, Jessica answered her. The flaming woman smiled and walked towards an office with translucent walls. She opened the see-through door and walked inside the room before closing the door behind her. Billy, Jessica, and me watched from the flaming coffee shop as the flaming woman sat in a chair and opened the book. Jessica turned from the door and relaxed. She's got to remember what happened, Jessica said, looking at Billy. She looked to me. Like, before we made her immortal, she remembered being consumed by me and what she was doing in her life before that. Me smiled and shrugged. Billy kept his watch on the doorway. To me, she's into progression, so she will help us out. If only for that, Billy said to Jessica. Worst case scenario, she attempts to join our team like Rick did. Do you really need more followers, Billy? Jessica asked, sounding bothered. Next thing you'll be thinking of is sending her out to fight for you. Get a few more of us loyal followers and you will have yourself an immortal army. Billy rolled his eyes. Jessica turned back towards the doorway as the flaming woman got up and exited her office room. She walked to the doorway between their two self-reflections and greeted them by throwing Billy's book through the door and onto the floor of the flaming coffee shop. So, I saw me, and then shit started to get hectic as fuck around here, the flaming woman said, addressing the room. I then later saw me walking around, and I followed from a distance. I watched some flaming people fight with Billy, and I watched me as she seemed to be talking to you. The flaming woman paused and looked at Billy. I was jealous and angry and confused, which helped me best you on the battlefield. Then I remember getting picked up and turned upside down. It was almost as if me threw me back where I came from. It was a seamless transition from being upside down and going inside her mouth to opening my eyes in the cottage. I remembered my most recent incarnation. She backed away from the door and a chair appeared. She sat down and looked through the doorway. Basically teleportation, Billy said to the group. The teleportation blue lightning attracts people to us, and the people who are teleported retain their memories. Not very tactful, Billy said. Did you have any souls inside of you when you were battling Billy? Jessica asked the flaming woman. She shook her head. It seemed the fashion of the war to send captured souls to the star, the flaming woman told them through the door. I can communicate with my intuition and now know it's aware of this moment, but how do I get it out? She asked, looking at Billy and me. Jessica looked at the flaming woman, then to Billy, then back to the flaming woman before settling on Billy. Whoa, we don't even know your name and you want us to trust you with the manifestation of your intuition running around? Jessica spoke to the flaming woman while looking at Billy. Billy here started this war and had to fight his own insanity when me first showed up. I don't think you know what you're asking for. Billy made a yielding palm-up gesture. She knows what she's asking for. What should we trade? Me said in a toneless voice. Jessica's jaw dropped. I'll trade you the opportunity for one intuition to speak to another. The flaming woman looked from me to Billy. You tell me how, and I'll manifest it here while we're still connected. Fuck, Jessica said. She hugged me close to her. Deal, Billy said. Me clapped her hands and Jessica squeezed her tighter. Listen, you've read my book, but I don't know you. I don't want to tell you what to do, so this is gonna... Listen, you've read my book, but I don't know you. I don't want to tell you what to do, so this is just a suggestion, but I think you should ask your intuition how to manifest it. The flaming woman shifted in her seat. Why did you suggest that? She asked. Tell her how you almost went insane, Billy. You want to hear the cautionary tale, don't you? Jessica cut in. The flaming woman glared at Jessica. Billy doesn't know everything, but he does make excellent suggestions, Me said in her toneless voice. The flaming woman's eyes softened. I mean, he isn't completely selfless, but he troubleshoots like a boss, Me finished. So what? Do you assume is the difference between me learning from you and me learning from my intuition? The flaming woman asked, looking at Billy. The differences could manifest in anything from relatable instructions to the relationship between you and your intuition. Billy paused and looked at the flaming woman. She was silent. I could regale you with the story of my personal struggle to lessen the chance of trouble, Billy said. No, I'll ask my intuition, the flaming woman said, sounding as if she had come to a decision. I don't need to hear about the time you almost failed if I could see you here and now. If you succeeded, then I know I can too. Me smiled a big smile of light. Billy looked surprised and Jessica looked frightened. Fuck, Jessica said. The flaming woman sighed and stood up. She walked back into the office she was in and closed the translucent door. Jessica let go of me and walked back to hear Jessica let go of me and walked back to her seat in the flaming coffee shop. She glared at Billy. Mr. Only I Can Judge My Intuition is going to let a random woman with her own secret intuitions, mind you, loose on this hellscape. What's to stop her from making you a target, Billy? Billy sat down next to Jessica. Me turned to face them. Common courtesy? Maybe admiration for a pioneer would stop her from making me a target? Billy responded, smiling. I'm pretty sure that I'm more valuable outside of her in working condition. She won't make me a target. I'm pretty sure that if I'm more valuable outside of her and in working condition, she won't make me a target. This shit is crazy, Jessica said, sounding tired. I've been looking forward to talking to her intuition since you told me to consume that bitch, Jessica, me said in her toneless voice. Things could go bad, but so far they are going swimmingly. I find it simpler to just assume the best because doubts lead to weakness here, she said, turning back towards the door and the flaming woman. The flaming woman was in the office room, pacing back and forth. She did it, me said in her toneless voice. There were now 2 people in the office room. Her intuition was half the size of her, and they could see that it too was Vanta Black and dressed in a rainbow tunic. It fucking worked, Jessica said. She took a big sip of her coffee. What's the game plan here? I'm going to talk to him from the door, me answered, Jessica sighing. I'm going to talk to him from the door, me answered. Jessica sighed. I trust you, me, Billy said. I trust you too, Billy, me said. And we respect and trust you, Jessica. Believe me, I know. Me said. She hugged Jessica, then walked to Billy and brought him back to the doorway. It's almost time, she said. Jessica took a big sip of her coffee. Okay, we're doing this. Fuck. I trust you too, Jessica said. She got out of her chair and joined Billy and me by the doorway. They watched as the flaming woman spoke to her manifested intuition in the office room. The flaming woman was seated, and they could see her intuition walking around slowly like it was admiring things.